Good morning, everyone. This is to be delivered at Eitaikyo, at your Eitaikyo service on 18th of October, but I'm recording it a few days earlier because of these complications and technical complications which I am not too familiar with, and this way I can iron out all of the technical difficulties that might arise. So I have not been to Stockton, the Buddhist Church of Stockton, for a while. I believe it was last year, I'm not sure. I was here at the to assist in Henry Shibata's memorial service. And now I understand that you have a new minister, Candace Shibata, whom I spoke and over the phone negotiating with her. And Reverend Motoyoshi had invited me earlier. I believe it was Gotae, or maybe it was Hanamatsuri, I don't recall. But because of this COVID-19 emergency, it was pushed back, and Reverend Shibata contacted me to see if I was still available, and so here I am. Like Reverend Motoyoshi and Reverend Hasegawa, I too am from Hawaii. I grew up in rural Oahu. I went to the University of Hawaii, and then I worked as a graphic designer for a while before I went on to Kyoto to study. And this is where I met Reverend Hasegawa and Mrs. Hasegawa before they were married. So we go back a long ways. I first met Reverend Motoyoshi in Madison, Wisconsin, when I entered the doctoral program there. At that time, the University of Wisconsin at Madison was the only place in the United States that offered a degree in Buddhist studies. This is Gotae, and I hope you are faring well in this new normal, as it were, being cloistered in your homes, not meeting with friends, avoiding restaurants, etc. In that regard, I've read The Plague by Albert Camus. It talks about the bubonic plague in Algiers in a city called Oran. I've never been there, but Camus, of course, is an existentialist, and the novel talks about the emergency that occurs with the plague, first by the death of rats in and around the city, and he talks about the boredom and how people cope with the boredom of being cloistered in and the city being quarantined. Another book story, a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, is called The Mask of the Red Death. And in this story, a very short story, I recall reading it in high school, and this quarantine, of course, brought memories back of that novel, that short story, and I went to purchase it on Amazon, and it was delivered very recently, and I reread it. And it talks about a duke or a king who, tiring of the Red Death, cloistered himself in one of his mansions out in the country, stocked with provisions, and he invited 1,000 or more people to join him who were healthy and fun-loving. And they partied on while the plague was going on, and they would not let anyone in or out of the plague of this mansion. And but the plague reached them anyway, and they all passed away from the plague. But be that as it may, we now have Eitaikyo. Today we're observing Eitaikyo. Eitaikyo is a time to look back, a time to reflect on our indebtedness to our ancestors, and often time to remember often nameless ancestors and those who have no one to remember them or no one who could sponsor memorial services on their behalf. You know, in the Buddhist temple here in America and in Japan, our major rituals are meant to preserve the memories of our faith, of our Buddhist faith, a Jodo Shinshu tradition, and of course, Japanese culture. And oftentimes these three merge together, and we cannot distinguish one from the other. In January, of course, we have Honko service. This is dedicated to the memory of Shinran Shonin. In February, we have Nirvana Day, or Nehan-e, that commemorates the passing of Shakyamuni Buddha. In April, we have Hanamatsuri, the birth of Shakyamuni Buddha. And in May, we have Kotan-e, the birthday of Shinran Shonin. And of course, in July and August is Obon season, when we remember our ancestors, our deceased ancestors. And October, we have Eitaikyo. Sometimes it's observed in November, but this is the Eitaikyo season. Eitaikyo, I understand, is when you Stockton Buddhist Church has a past bishop's memorial service. In December, we have Jodo-e, probably the most important observance or service of the Buddhist faith, because this is the day we commemorate the enlightenment of Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha. Each of these services recall a special moment. And I want to show you these two slides. And these two slides are of Adashino Nenbutsuji, otherwise known very simply as Nenbutsuji or Nenbutsu Tera, the temple of the Nembutsu. How many of you have visited Nenbutsuji? If you ever go to Kyoto, I would highly recommend you're visiting this temple. Sure, you have to go to the Honganji. It's big and it's very formal. The Nenbutsuji is a small temple situated on the hills, on a hill overlooking the city of Kyoto. And it is near Arashiyama. All of you must have visited Arashiyama. It's one of the go-to places when you visit Kyoto. Since the Heian period, that would be from the 9th century, this was a very remote area. And it was an area which people abandoned the bodies of the dead. But starting from about 1903, the beginning of the last century, the temple collected images of what we call Muen Botoke, images sculpted in stone that were placed in and around the area where people had abandoned dead bodies, or people had found deceased corpse and placed a image of the Buddha. So if you visit Nenbutsuji and see all of the images, stone images that were collected by the temple, or the people of the temple, it memorializes some deceased soul. There are Buddhas. In Japanese, we call them deceased persons, Hotoke, Muen Botoke. Muen Botoke means Buddhas who have no one to remember them. At the temple, there are can be assured that the priest there will recite a Buddhist sutra and in repose of their lonely spirits. The purpose of these services, Eitaikyo, remind us of who we are. We are Buddhists, devotees of Jodo Shinshu, the disciples of Shinran Shonin, and also remind us that this is a Japanese temple. Memorial services remind us of our place amongst the generations of people that have gone before us, and we too should remember that we someday will also be ancestors. So I ask you a question. What happens when we remember? What happens when we remember? When we remember, we retrieve the past and transport it to the present. The past lives in the present. This is especially true during the Obon season. But today we're observing Eitaikyo. Eitaikyo service is a time to remember our distant ancestors of whom we have only a dim memory of, or those who we only know through aging photographs or only heard stories from our old-timers, as it were, our parents and grandparents. And I have two slides here. These are my ancestors. The man in the middle, the first picture, is my great-grandfather. And the tall man on the left is my grandfather. And sitting in front of him is my grandmother. And to the left is left of my great-grandfather, I guess left or right, is my grandfather's younger brother and his wife. And the second picture that I have out here, photographed, is a picture of my grandfather and my second uncle when they visited Davao in the Philippines just before the war. And the woman in the middle in the black costume or dress is my great-grandmother. And all the people around must be related to me in some fashion. Imagine if we had no memory of an ancestral past. I take great pride, as you must, in my ancestors, my ancestral homeland, and its customs, traditions, and language. Combing through these old photographs, memories which I retrieve from my elders, from my Koseki Tohon family registry that lists the names of my ancestors and their relatives, and records such as these of my family lineages. I have reconstructed some of my ancestral past. These memories are very precious, and I share them with my siblings, my daughters, and other relatives. And I say these memories are very precious, and you should hold them dear, because I recall an African American elder who once mentioned that she has no memory of her ancestral past. Her ancestors were violently, of course, uprooted from their homes, transported across a vast ocean to another continent. Generations of slavery have severed the memories of her homeland and culture. She wished, she said, she knew what language her ancestors spoke. She longed to know the customs of her ancestors, but she said she has none of that. Uprooted from their homes, their culture and traditions, Black Americans have had to forge a spiritual tradition from their slave masters. It is no wonder that they are rootless and angry. How fortunate I am to be able to know my ancestral homeland. I marvel at their courage, who left an impoverished land and managed to establish roots in a foreign land. As most of you who are immigrants, children of immigrants or grandchildren of immigrants, can empathize with me. Their courage and fortitude are lessons we should not forget. The memories of their accomplishments are great gifts that gives us pride in who we are. Earlier I mentioned that memories retrieve the past and transport it to the present. The past lives in the present. We honor the past and demonstrate our respect for our immediate and more distant past. Remembering is very important, because unless we remember, unless we are able to recall the past, the deceased no longer exist, and they will have vanished, literally vanished from this earth. I lost a brother when I was 4 years old. He was not quite 2. That would be 73 years ago. With the passing of my aunt 2 years ago, I am the only person who has any living memory of him. All the persons who had known him, who mourned for him, have passed themselves. My father, my mother, my aunts and uncles have all joined their ancestors. I am the only person who remembers. When I join my ancestors, there will be no one who will remember him, and when I am gone, he will be no more. During the Obon season and Eitaikyo service, I recall a calligraphy by Hakuin Zenji. And here we have a photograph that I reproduced. I forgot where I got this from, by Hakuin Zenji. Hakuin Zenji is a Rinzai Zen priest who lived in the mid-Edo period. That would be about 300 years ago. And here he, in the large character, he writes the character for virtue, toku. Now this is quite a different toku that we are accustomed to, but it means the same thing. And it reads in Chinese. The Japanese also wrote Chinese, of course, probably better than us today. And it says, pile up money to give to your children and grandchildren. They will squander it. Collect books to pass on to your children and grandchildren. They won't read it. Secretly, quietly cultivate virtue. Such a gift will continue for a long time. Hakuin was an astute observer of human nature. How many of you plan to leave your fortune to your children or grandchildren? Or that shiny red Corvette that your grandson coveted? None of these things, material things, Hakuin says, will persist. But if you cultivate virtue, that you have integrity, that you're an honest man or woman, this is what they will remember and they will learn. The best gift that you can bequeath to your children and grandchildren is the example of your life. Someday we all will become ancestors. How will you be remembered? Who will remember you? Have you thought of these things? What will be your legacy? What will be your spiritual legacy? I remember my father speaking. He was very cynical of politics and politicians. And we were talking one day, and he said to me quite forcefully, "I know of only one honest politician. I know of only one honest politician." And my retort was, how do you know? How do you know that he was an honest politician? And his answer was very succinct. He died a poor man. He died a poor man. And think about that. Did you live an honest life? What will your spiritual legacy be? For my father, this lesson of honesty and integrity was what he remembered of Johnny Wilson, a one-time mayor of Honolulu. So in closing, today, this morning, we observe Eitaikyo, a perpetual memorial service. It is a time to remember our ancestors, and the temple does a great service when the temple collectively remembers all those unknown ancestors, people we have forgotten, or those who have no one to remember them. And this is the real meaning of Eitaikyo. So, Gassho. Namo Amida Buddha. Namo Amida Buddha. Thank you very much.